This film is entitled Concrete Utopia in 2023, a disaster thriller genre film that tells the story of the devastating earthquake disaster that occurred in South Korea and destroyed many cities, especially the city of Seoul. But there is one apartment building that remains and is still standing tall. So, the residents there are trying to survive, but of course, they will face many obstacles. The film begins with a documentary showing the progress of apartment construction in South Korea over time and making life easier for the people there. The residents of the apartment are people who are well off and have a decent economic life. One day, in the city of Seoul there was a terrible earthquake that destroyed the metropolitan city until it no longer had the shape of a city. All that could be seen was a stretch of rubble from destroyed buildings. So did the collection of falling apartments. However, during the chaos, fortunately, there was still one apartment called Hwang Gung that was still standing tall and only suffered minimal damage. It can be seen that almost all the residents there survived the earthquake, including our main actor, Min Seong, who is a civil servant and lives in unit number 602 with his wife, a nurse named Byung-hunPark. After the earthquake, the situation became so severe that water and electricity supplies stopped. All the residents of Hwang's apartment went down to the lobby and asked the security guard and apartment manager what their fate would be. They also demanded information on when aid from the government would arrive, because apart from the many victims who had to be evacuated, over time the remaining food would soon run out. Min Seong also felt the same thing. His wife said they could only survive for a week on the food left in the refrigerator. Due to the destruction of nearby buildings and the very cold air, people who were still safe and homeless finally sought shelter in Hwang Gung's apartment. And some of the refugees came from the luxury apartment, namely Dream Palace, which is located nearby. The refugees also begged to be given shelter, such as a child named Jumong and his mother who begged to be allowed into Min Seong and his wife's apartment. At first Min Seong refused, but in the end, they were both invited in by Myung-hwa because he couldn't bear to let them outside. Then Myung-hwa taught Jumong how to communicate using a walkie-talkie. The disaster has also damaged several social structures, one of which is that the barter system is back in effect, such as Min Seong, who bought canned fruit and exchanged it for a watch, went home to the apartment to eat with his wife. But in the end, Myung-hwa also gave it to Jumong because she couldn't bear them. Finally, one afternoon, a riot broke out in one of the apartment units. The owner of the unit was evicted and even stabbed by an outsider who wanted to occupy his apartment unit. And as a nurse, Myung-hwa, who happened to be passing by with her husband, immediately helped the man. However, not long after, smoke appeared billowing from inside the unit and it turned out there was a fire inside there. Right after the explosion occurred, a man named Yong-tak ran with a par to immediately extinguish the fire there. Unfortunately, the fire extinguisher was too small and ran out quickly. Yoon didn't even try to turn on the fire extinguisher water hose and also asked Min Seong for help to direct the hose to the fire point. They tried to extinguish the fire until they finally succeeded in extinguishing it. Then the head of the Women's Council of Hwang Gung Apartments, Kim Ji-mae, met Yong-tak to thank him because his heroic actions had prevented the fire from spreading to other units. Asked Yong what unit number he lived in. Before he answered, there was a man who recognized Yong's face and didn't say that the person was from floor number 9 because they had been in the same elevator. Yong did not agree with the man's words and said, "I live in unit number 902 with my mother who is old and sickly." After that incident, GMAE invited the Hwang Gung residents to a closed meeting in my unit to prevent the incident from happening again. According to them, the fire was caused by people outside Hwang Gung who entered the crime scene unit without permission. Apart from that, there were also many complaints from other residents because food and drink supplies continued to run low. Almost everyone at the meeting agreed to evict the refugees, because according to GMAE, most of them came from Dream Palace, which is a more luxurious apartment than Hwang Gung's, and before this disaster, many Dream Palace people behaved arrogantly and selfishly towards the residents of the surrounding apartments. However, some of them did not agree, such as Myung-hwa, who preferred that the refugees stay in Hwang Gung until the rescue team arrived. Because of this difference of opinion, GMAE asked Min Seong, who works as a civil servant, about what to do in an emergency. Min Seong believes the first thing is to set up the system and organization and then elect a group of counselors to collect votes. Apart from that, the apartment residents also have to elect a leader. Hearing that, GMAE was sure that the suitable leader in this situation was Yong-tak. That person was elected as interim leader, and after that, a vote was held to decide whether the Hwang Gung refugees should be expelled or remain there. White pieces mean repel while black ones mean the opposite. Then once all the residents of Hwang Gung had cast their votes, it turned out that there were far more white pieces than black. This means that newcomers other than the residents of the Hwang Gung apartment have to leave there. Before going to sleep, Min Seong remembers the wound on his hand. Then we flash back to when the earthquake had just happened, and at that time Min Seong and other people were helping a woman who was hit by a car. Because the earthquake was getting closer, Min Seong was forced to leave the woman and immediately took shelter in the car. Back to the film, because later there will be many refugees who don't want to be expelled and there could even be clashes between them. Therefore, the council agreed to first spread information about the expulsion to people and then expel them the next morning. Apart from that, native residents must also prepare weapons in case a clash occurs. Hearing this plan, one of the board members named Do Jaeon resigned due to his poor physical condition. Meanwhile, outside the meeting, Young did not offer Min Seong to be the head of apartment security because Min Seong was still young and had just completed military service. The next day, GMAE shouted from the loudspeaker for all the refugees to immediately gather outside the apartment and promised to provide them with empty housing. When the refugees had gathered outside, the resident councilors came to the front door of the main lobby carrying weapons and iron fences which intimidated the refugees. The situation became very tense. However, Young did not announce that all refugees were no longer allowed to live in Hwang and had to leave there, even including the security guards who had worked in that building for 20 years. Suddenly, the refugees immediately protested because many of the residents of Hwang's apartment were just renters, not owners. Apart from that, the very cold air outside will also kill them slowly. One of the refugees, who was previously an official, tried to negotiate but Young firmly did not tell the person to leave. In the end, Young was not pushed by the official's assistant and ordered all the refugees to push through the residence blockade line and break back into the apartment. Finally, a riot between the two parties occurred. Finally, the refugees who forced their way in were pushed back out of the building, but there was one refugee who dared to hit Young Tak on the head with an iron rod. Young did not remain standing even though blood was flowing from his head. He then grabbed the iron rod and shouted at all the refugees to get out of there. Seeing Young Tak's figure who was so firm and fearless and followed by all the residents of Hwang who were throwing things from various floors, all the refugees were very scared and finally left there. After all the refugees left, Young Tak and GMAE organized a major apartment renovation, starting by carrying out resident regulations that clean up debris in the apartment environment, installing fences, then pets, and making electricity. Apart from that, it also created many divisions that took care of certain things, such as the security section led by Min Seong, the health section, and the troops who distributed food and drinks according to the residents' work contribution. Apart from that, the council also teaches how to dispose of waste, including defecating using plastic and then throwing it in the place provided, because water is very limited. GMA even told people to continue trading by bartering so that economic activities could continue. Because they couldn't survive with the remaining food and drink supplies, in the end, Young didn't move the men there, including Min Seong, to go exploring outside the apartment to look for foodstuffs and useful items. They started their journey for the first time and passed a collection of corpses of refugees who had frozen to death. After that, while they were outside, an explosion occurred somewhere which made the apartment people worry about their families. But fortunately, the search team is fine. But this turned around with their findings. Unfortunately, most of the food they found was moldy. They continued searching from one place to another for days. From the beginning they were still enthusiastic, now they are bored and hopeless. Meanwhile, the amount of food they get every day is not commensurate with the residents' needs and it is clear that supplies in Hwang are running low. In the middle of the search, Young Tak and Min Seong had time to confide in each other about being married. However, due to a conflict, Young does not have to live separately from his wife. Min Seong also confided that he wanted to have children, but unfortunately, Myung Hwa had a miscarriage a year ago. Meanwhile, at Hwang's apartment, Myung Hwa was shocked when she heard Ju Mong's voice calling from one of the apartment floors. After that, the two of them chatted via walkie-talkie. It turns out that Do Jaeon, who didn't take part in the demonstration at that time, was secretly hiding several refugees from outside because he didn't agree with the council's decision. Sometime later, the search team finally managed to find a shop filled with food and drink supplies. Young Tak and his team will now go inside, while Min Seong goes to check the back of the shop. However, as soon as they entered, one of them was immediately pointed at with a gun by the man who owned the place. Seeing that, Min Seong quietly approached him and was about to attack him. It's very sad, because previously they were willing to expel refugees, but now for their lives, they are willing to rob them. Even Young didn't have the heart to kill the shop owner. After that, the Hwang apartment troops managed to get quite a large supply of food. But on the other hand, you can see the sadness of the man's wife and children crying over his death. News about Hwang's apartment spread among people who survived the earthquake. Many do not believe that there are apartments that are still standing tall and have a decent social life like before the disaster. They also exaggerated the news by saying that Young and his team didn't have the heart to kill the people they met and would use them as food for the Hwang community. Meanwhile, in Hwang they are holding a luxurious New Year's festival thanks to the ingredients they looted earlier. However, the party stopped because GME's son, Jae-hyuk, saw a woman from Hwang who came named Haewon. It turns out that before the earthquake disaster struck, there was a problem in her family which made Hyun and her mother move to another apartment. Apart from that, Hwang is the next door neighbor in Young-tak's unit, but don't remember the person's face. Then after Hwang was introduced in front of many people, they continued the party and Young didn't perform a song. While singing, I remember the past. It turns out his real identity is a taxi driver named Tae-hwa Eom. On the day of the disaster, he went to Unit 902 in Hwang Gung to collect money from the real Young-tak, who was the lawyer who had cheated Sebum by taking all his savings. That day, in front of Young-tak's mother, the two of them fought because Young didn't refuse to return the money, even though Sebum needed the money to pay off the debt too. Tae-hwa, who was very emotional, continued to attack Young until finally, the man died in front of Young-tak's mother, who could only lie weak. After that, Tae-hwa called, followed by the voice of his wife who was angry because the debt collector had come to collect the debt. I could only cry because I was also cheated and couldn't do anything. A few moments after the phone went dead, Tae-hwa was shocked to look out the window because of the terrible earthquake that had occurred. And now we are back to the party. With the presence of Hwang, who knew Young's face wasn't real, I felt worried because the woman would reveal his identity. During the distribution of food, Byung-hwa heard gossip saying that the search team had killed people to get food supplies. Byung-hwa also confirmed the truth to Min-seong. Then Byung-hwa told her husband to stop hunting because I knew Min-seong was not that type of person. Then, Byung-hwa went to the Do-jaeon unit to provide food supplies to the refugees secretly. However, Byung-hwa's actions were seen by Young-tak, who was not far away. Not long after Hwang, he passed in front of Young-tak and entered his unit. But suddenly Young didn't come in because he wanted to give Hwang a heater, even though Young didn't intend to threaten Hwang subtly so that she would think that Young-tak was her neighbor. After that, the women gathered and Hwang was now being examined by Byung-hwa. Then, the people there were jealous and bullied Hwang for casually entering Hwang Gung's apartment and not sharing in the hardships of their struggle to make Hwang Gung livable like it is now. Hwang, who couldn't stand being bullied by these people, immediately became emotional and left the room. Byung-hwa immediately chased him and tried to calm him down. But Hwang immediately complained about the person, even though they didn't know how she had struggled to survive on the way to Hwang Gung. Also tells about Young-tak who entered the apartment without permission, and Hwang is very sure that this man is not my neighbor. Hearing this, Byung-hwa was shocked and intended to find out what Young didn't do. Then, at the same time, people screamed because they found a resident who had been killed by outsiders and there were threatening letters so that they would be more alert. Seeing the cry of the man's family, Young didn't even remember his wife's child who had died in the earthquake. In the evening, when Do-jaeon was eating with the refugees, Young suddenly didn't come with the other residents to search the house. When they were discovered, finally the refugees, including Ju-mong and Min-seong, were shocked to see the situation and received information from Young-tak that all this time Byung-hwa had been secretly giving them food. In the end, the husband and wife quarreled, and Byung-hwa felt that her husband was increasingly strange like the others. Also, Young did not like what Hwang said earlier. However, because of his emotions, Min-seong ignored Byung-hwa's words and asked his wife to stay at home until he came home. Because Min-seong was afraid that Young and his team would throw them both out. Min-seong was even willing to apologize and kneel in front of Young so that his family would remain safe. The next day, as head of the security division and to stay there with his wife, Min-seong led a search of each unit to look for other hidden refugees. Even Min-seong did not hesitate to be rude to them. Apart from that, the residents were promised additional food if they provided information on the location of the refugees. Until finally many refugees were found and immediately expelled from Hwang Gung. After the search was complete and all the refugees had been expelled, the occupants who had smuggled in the refugees were simply punished by saying we were wrong 200 times. However, among them, Do-jaeon was not seen. It turns out he was preparing to jump from the front of his apartment unit because he was so depressed by the attitude of Young-tak and the rest of the team who were very selfish and just kicked out outsiders without thinking about the lives of their fellow humans. Finally, they committed suicide and were cremated because according to gossip, the bodies they had thrown away had disappeared and had probably been taken by refugees who had become cannibals. After that, there was a small earthquake for a moment and fortunately, this created a water source nearby. Meanwhile, Byung-hwa asked Hwang about Young-tak, who he said was not her real neighbor. Then Hwang explained that I had once handed over a package that was sent by mistake to my unit and remembered what Young's face looked like. It wasn't real. Therefore, they both believed that leader Young would not be keeping secrets. On the other hand, Young didn't seem worried when he saw the two of them seem to be planning something because he was starting to fear that his identity would be revealed. Then, the search team continued its mission. While digging through the ruins, they managed to find a lot of supplies and immediately looted them. At the same time, Byung-hwa and Hwang break through the wall to get into Young-tak's unit. There they both found grandmothers, but unfortunately had difficulty speaking. They also looked for clues in the house, until finally Myung-hwa saw a very suspicious refrigerator because the door was tightly closed with tape. And it turns out that all this time Young's body was not real and was kept in the refrigerator with his wallet. Meanwhile, the search team was very happy because they could bring home a lot of food. And on the way home, Min-seong also found a hairpin and planned to give it to Myung-hwa. But suddenly, Jae-hyuk was thrown a Molotov cocktail which immediately exploded there. It turns out that many people had been living in the ruins, and they were attacking each other. After that, as a result of the riots, many members of the search team were injured, especially Jae-hyuk, who was seriously injured and finally died when he arrived at Hwang Gung. The mother was hysterical when she saw her dead child and immediately blamed Young-tak for not being able to look after the child. Young-tak, who doesn't accept being blamed, snaps at Jim-ae and says that you should thank your son who has sacrificed so that the people in Hwang Gung's apartment can eat properly. But right after that, Myung-hwa came and threw Young's non-original wallet and also read out Hwang Gung's rules, namely that only real residents could occupy Hwang Gung's apartment. Not long after, a group of people arrived carrying a refrigerator containing the body of the real Young-tak. Everyone immediately turns against Young-tak. Min-seong, who trusted him, asked for an answer as to why he didn't kill Young. Young-tak, who is in despair, screams hysterically if he has been willing to sacrifice himself for the people of Hwang Gung's apartment and also considers the residents there like his family. However, because he had killed the original residents and had taken the identity of Young-tak and expelled many refugees from outside who ironically were not the original residents of Hwang Gung. A riot finally broke out and everyone immediately threw Young-tak out. In the middle of the riot, he saw Hae-won watching him from afar. Because his anger was out of control, Young didn't immediately get out of the crowd and ran to catch Hae-won, then dragged Hae-won and dropped her into a very deep sinkhole. Everyone was shocked to see Young-tak's craziness in throwing Hae-won there. After that, Min-seong came and pointed a gun at Young-tak, but unfortunately the bullets ran out. Young didn't immediately take the gun and reload it from his pocket. But suddenly there was a noisy sound from outside the fence which turned out to be people from outside trying to break into the apartment. Riots ensued, and both camps killed each other brutally. Meanwhile, Min-seong and Myung-hwa managed to escape to a unit, until finally several people managed to enter and stab Min-seong. While in the lobby, there was a rebel who threw a bomb right into the middle of the riot. The bomb explosion injured many people, including Young-tak KW, who was seriously injured. But still strengthening himself, he walked to his apartment unit at 902. When he got there, Young-tak, who was so weak, collapsed and finally died. Not long after that, outsiders came to steal all the food in his unit. Fortunately, Min-seong and Myung-hwa managed to escape from there and rested in the ruins of the church. Min-seong's condition is also getting weaker due to the stab wound in his stomach. Before falling asleep, Min-seong apologized for all his mistakes, then also gave him a hairpin that he had previously found as a gift for his wife. The next morning, Min-seong had died and Myung-hwa was devastated, crying over her husband's departure, until finally a group of people came to see and asked Myung-hwa to come with them. Myung-hwa finally went to their house, where it turned out there was a gathering of refugee people. Even though there are not too many people, they welcome people from outside to stay there. This is very different from the Hwang Gung apartment which was led by Young-tak to expel all refugees from outside. Even though in the end the rescue team never came, now the survivors form their groups, and some of them see each other's groups as enemies, as happened in Hwang Gung, which was eventually destroyed. However, some groups allow outsiders to survive, like the one Myung-hwa is visiting now. And the film ended.